All right, today's the day. I'm bringing the series back. For any of you guys who have followed me since maybe the beginning, but for a very, very long time at least, you guys might remember this sort of series that I started doing called Unusual Writing Tips. And I call it a sort of series because it ended up being, I think, just 2 videos. I intended to keep the series going and to do a ton more videos, but it just, for whatever reason, didn't end up happening. But I've always wanted to, and I've always kind of kept it on the back burner, just writing down ideas for, you know, future videos, but I've just never actually sat down and done another one. So finally, like 3-4 years later maybe, I'm bringing the series back. Of course, the majority of you guys probably were not following me at that time, so you might not even know those videos existed, so I will leave a link in the description box below to both of those videos if you want to go and watch them. But tiny little disclaimer, remember this was 3-4 maybe even years ago. It was like 2013 I think when I did both these videos, and it was right at the beginning of my YouTubing and everything, so just a warning. The editing's way different, I am way different, I'm like a good 4 years younger. It's not gonna be at all the type of video that you're watching right now and that you might be used to seeing from me. So just a little warning if you do want to venture back into memory lane. Hopefully the tips are still good, but it might be a little bit painful to watch, honestly. But I decided just to continue this series with another installment basically today. So today I really want to talk about my unusual writing tips for specifically motivation and finding motivation as a writer. The reason I call this series unusual is because it's things that I don't think are very typical that other writers recommend to each other. So it's stuff that either just I do myself and no one's ever told me to do it, or maybe it's something that just like one particular writer mentioned in a YouTube video or in a blog post or something. So of course it's possible that you guys have heard of some of these, but the idea is that hopefully you haven't. So that was a very long intro, but without further ado, let me actually get into the core of this video. The very first tip I have for you guys is to keep a notebook log of each writing session, what day it was, and how many words you wrote, or how many characters, or both, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm not sure it really does any good to have both the word count and the character count, but where I got this idea was from a French author who YouTubes. She does character count, and I don't know if it has to do with maybe something that's more common in French publishing, or it's just her. So I decided to include both word and character, but I really just use the word count. Anyway, the point of this exercise is just to keep track of your writing progress, basically, and your writing frequency. So this is the book that I use. You probably recognize this if you follow me on Instagram, because a lot of my writing Instagrams are with this book. It's kind of become like my companion now every time I write. The word count is important, but I think really what I use it for most is just the frequency. So I can literally go back. I started doing this in, looks like February when I started it, so it's actually a fairly recent project that I've been doing. And I can go back and I can actually look at how many times in February did I write, how many times in March, and I can see the months that I did really well and the months that I didn't do as well in terms of just how much I wrote, both word count and frequency again. So it's really, really helpful, and it's definitely inspired me for my motivation with writing, because as I'm writing, I'm thinking I need a good word count to put on there, you know, it's like an extra little boost. And between writing sessions, I can blatantly see if I'm sort of like slacking off or not. And again, it's not a good idea, I don't think, to put too much pressure on yourself if you're writing, you know, slows or quickens based on what's going on in your life. But when you do need that extra push of motivation, it's there for you, and I think it's really great for that. I mentioned Instagram in that last one, and that is another thing that I have found extremely useful, specifically not just Instagram pictures, but Instagram stories. So if any of you guys do follow me on Instagram, you know that I do this already, but often when I do a session, almost every session actually, I will do an Instagram story right before I start, and often an Instagram story afterward. This adds a level of accountability to it. So if I sit down and I plan to myself, I'm gonna do a writing session right now, I mean, I'm pretty disciplined, so I'd like to think that the majority of the time I'll actually follow through and do it. But if I post it on Instagram and tell all my Instagram followers that I'm about to start a writing session, it's a lot more likely, meaning like 100% likely, that I will plug in and do a writing session. Regardless of how good or bad it is, I will follow through with my plan. The reason I really like Instagram stories specifically for this, and Snapchat stories works as well for any of you guys who like Snapchat, but the reason I think this story format works so well is because it's temporary, it disappears after 24 hours, so it's not a huge deal if your followers aren't really into that type of content, or if they don't really care that much about your progress, they can skip over it really easily. It's just kind of a casual format, but it also gets it out there into the world. And from my perspective, as the person posting and as the writer, it definitely helps with the accountability, and it definitely helps to know that people are sort of joining me on this very solitary journey. Even though I tend to prefer Instagram stories for my writing, there's also tons of other ways you can utilize social media in general. For example, on Twitter, there's the hashtag #amwriting. A lot of people will do stuff like writing sprints. I especially see that during NaNoWriMo. One of the most demotivating things as a writer is that you are sort of just sitting there by yourself for, you know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And it is a really solitary activity, but if you use social media right, you can actually do it in a way that motivates you with other people, you know, and you have like internet friends to join you on this journey. I also use regular Instagram posts the same way. I don't do it every session, but often I will take like 10 minutes before I start my writing session and just accept that time is not going to be actually writing. And I'll take a nice picture of like my tea or my notebook or something, because I love Instagram, you guys probably know that. But I'll take those extra 10 minutes before I start and I'll do a nice little picture and add the right filter and then post it, use a few hashtags so I can get other people's attention in the writing community, and then I will buckle down and write. And that is extremely motivating as well. My fourth tip is to plan your writing sessions into your calendar. So this is not something that I actually currently do, but it's something that I did with my last book and it worked really, really well. So I definitely wanted to mention it. So what I did was create an event, you know, like how you can create, I think it's just called a calendar, but a separate calendar with a different color for every post that you put within that calendar. And I made it purple because it's my favorite color. So don't know if that's really motivating, but I really like purple. So I created a new calendar, just titled it writing, and every time I wanted to do a session, I planned these in advance and I would put it in my calendar. And even if I did one afterward, I would still put it in my calendar just so I could see it on my calendar. This did, I think, a few very useful things for me. So first, what it did was help me plan regular sessions into my calendar. Because this was before I was doing a log and I couldn't really see when I was doing sessions, it was really important at that time to do certain sessions, certain times of week when I could fit them in, but to plan it out. Like I knew what my schedule was going to be for the week. I was in classes at the time and I knew what this was going to be, so I knew when I could work in my writing. So it helped me plan that out and keep a regular schedule of my writing, but it also helped me feel more official about those times that I was dedicating to writing. One thing that I think affects a lot of unpublished writers, a lot of people who are still sort of amateur, I hate using that word, but you know, we're not professionals, we're not published. We don't have an editor telling us we need this many pages by this date and certain things have to be accomplished and this is when the overall, you know, book deadline is. We don't have any of that. So there is absolutely no professional aspect to what we're doing. And it's really easy when you're just kind of throwing it into your schedule randomly to feel like it's one of those things like watching TV. You can do it or you cannot do it. So I think that really does have an effect, at least for me, on my motivation to write, to add that sort of professional aspect. This is when my writing session starts and ends. This is when I need to be writing. My next tip is to read books or to watch YouTube that has to do with writing. For me personally, I have read a few books about writing, but where I get a lot of my inspiration or just a lot of my ideas and motivation is from YouTube videos. Even if I watch a video completely about a subject that has nothing to do with me, like I've watched videos from writers who write completely different genres that I'm not even interested in writing yet. And you know, I just watched a huge series on beta readers, which is something that hopefully is in my future, but it's not like around the corner. It's not like next week or next month in my future. Even if I don't have immediate plans for the type of content that I'm watching, or even if it's not something that directly applies to what I'm writing or what I even want to write, it's so helpful just to watch another writer speak or to read a blog or a book from another writer and just to learn about sort of how they approach the craft of writing. My sixth and final tip is one that is potentially a tiny bit controversial, and it's one that I think you do have to be careful with. I definitely do think it's unusual because I'm not sure everybody would recommend it to you, but I'm going to anyway. I'm gonna go there. But sometimes to motivate yourself to write, I think you have to let yourself multitask a little bit. Let me explain. So when I am sitting in front of a computer and I'm staring at a blank screen and I cannot get myself to write, obviously sometimes you should just, you know, call it quits for that day. Like, don't always push yourself to write, but sometimes you even can push yourself to write by giving yourself a little break. Instead of just making myself sit in that chair and stare at that screen until I get some words down. Probably everybody watching this video at this point knows exactly what I'm talking about and knows just how frustrating that is. Sometimes I'll just step away and I'll put in a load of laundry, or I'll do some dishes, or I'll vacuum the floor, or just do some sort of preferably menial activity, something that doesn't really take brain power, but something that gets me up, gets me going. You've probably read before that getting up and, you know, sort of getting your blood flowing can actually help your brain, can actually help you think. And not only that, it gives you a chance to do something very repetitive, very routine-like, but it doesn't actually use your brain muscles. So a lot of times for me, what this ends up doing is it kind of gives me that false sense of security, like I've given up, I'm not going to force myself to do something that I was having so much trouble doing, but it also leaves my brain sort of still churning. So a lot of times I'll be thinking about my book while I'm like washing the dishes or, you know, putting in the laundry, and I'll keep thinking about it just kind of softly in the back of my brain, not pushing myself, not sitting in front of that horrid white screen. And And then once I've done that task, that, you know, 5 or 10 minute tops task, then I go and sit back down and then I try it again. It really helps me. But of course the danger with this one, and why maybe people wouldn't necessarily always recommend it to you, is that you get started in a task that is very time consuming and then you just never get back to writing, and that is a danger. So I never like start organizing my clothes or my bookshelves or anything like that, because that is going to just suck me in and I will never get back out. You know, 2 hours later I'll realize, oh, I was supposed to write, wasn't I? So that's a terrible idea. Don't do that if you actually plan on still working in your session that day. But just choose a very short and simple activity, something that will only take you 5 or 10 minutes, and then try again. Just sit back down and try again. If you're like me, this really might help with your motivation. So those are all the tips that I have for you guys today. Those are the ones I decided to talk about. Of course, there are more on this subject and tons of other writing subjects that I could talk about, but those were just the ones that I felt like were the most helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any more tips on this subject of motivation and searching for motivation and staying motivated with writing. I would love to know some more. I'm sure other writers who are watching this video would also love to, so head down to the comment section. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and definitely let me know if you want to see more. I'm really excited to do more now. As always, thank you guys all so much for watching, especially if you're one of those old timers who actually did watch those videos, or even if you're just watching them now for the first time. Like, props to you, really, for being able to take that like 2013 YouTube. Anyway, thank you guys all so much for watching, for however long you've been watching, and I will see you very soon in another video.